Okay. Hey, good evening, everybody. And for those of you attending again, welcome back. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, appreciate you making time tonight to join Sergeant Major Ruiz and I for this virtual town hall. This is our third, I think it's our third one we've been doing. We've committed to these moments with you so that we can be a little more proactive in our messaging to the force and to the folks out there that support the force, families, employers, etc. And we try to pick a topic each time. And tonight, based on the conversations that we have had with you when we travel and visit Marines, we've gotten a high degree of interest on the future of the Reserve Force, particularly under force design. And so we're going to try and keep our comments focused on the future of what the Reserve Force will be in the years to come and the opportunities that should present themselves for you as serving Marines and for those of you who are contemplating service in the Reserve component. Sergeant Major, anything?
Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you for, if you're watching this live right now, it's, in the East Coast, it's an hour later and you probably could be doing a lot of other things. So for you to take the time, thank you so much for being here. But as the commander stated, there's an opportunity for us to keep you informed. And, as a Sergeant Major, that is just an amazing thing for me, for a commander to take the time and inform the force of what's happening and what's going to happen in the next 10, 15 years. Every time I have an opportunity to speak to Marines, I always say, don't wait until drill weekend to pass the word or make contact with the Marines. So this is the way that we're attempting to do it. We don't have to wait till drill weekend. We'd like to make contact with you today.
Yeah, so for the format that we've tried to execute is something that we have done, and I'm sure you have done many, many times in your service. This is no different than after a formation, let's say on a Friday, where we circle up the Marines and we just have a candid conversation with you. And the deal we make is any question you have, a straight question, you'll get a very straight answer from us. I'll share as much as I can to include about what's going on in current events, if that's what's on your mind. Obviously, we're in an unclassified environment, so there's only so much I can share or we can share. But understand that you're probably interested in that. So with that said, let's go ahead and get started.
Hurrah. General, we've got somebody that just came on the line and asking about seeing information about Marine Forces Reserve supporting II MEF. How and when will that start and what is it?
So as part of the service's reorientation for the future so that we can become a more lethal and survivable force and more specifically aligned against threats that are emerging around the world, we had to kind of look at what the roles and responsibilities were of our major formations. So within the operating forces of the Marine Corps, there's 1, 2, and 3 Marine Expeditionary Forces. Most everybody understands that. And Marine Forces Reserve is bundled in that. So one of the problem sets that was emerging in our studies, the services studies, was how does the service respond to contingencies around the globe that aren't in Indo-PACOM, that aren't part of the Pacific problem set, the Pacific threats? And so the decision has been made by the Commandant to more closely align Marine Forces Reserve with 2nd Marine Expeditionary Force that responds primarily out of North Carolina, and if they're not already pre-deployed. And so bundling those forces together, how do we respond to crisis or contingencies in places like AFRICOM, CENTCOM, EUCOM, and others, SOUTHCOM? And so there's been a pretty rigorous study and a very good partnership between MARFORRES and II MEF to try to design that future for us. And we're pretty far along in that now.
And it's still going.
Yeah.
It's still happening even today, being briefed on the developments of it. But how exciting it is to know that this is coming and what requirements could come out of it, sir. And and how we can develop the force later on to meet those requirements.
Yeah, what's interesting, so I left active duty and joined the reserves in 1997. And this is the first time during my service that we've ever had an active partner in specifically one of the MEFs. And that's been very empowering for us. Working together to help define the threats and what capabilities we needed together and how the reserve component can add to that. So it's been highly educational for me, and I'm very encouraged by what's happening right now.
For Marines that are just now hearing the term service retained forces, what is that and how does that relate to us?
Okay, so why II MEF and MFR bundled together? Because believe it or not, the service or the commandant, it doesn't operationally control 3rd Marine Expeditionary Force, for example. That force, under doctrinal terms, is allocated, assigned to INDOPACOM, the combatant commander in the Pacific. He or she has operational control of that MEF. So the same is true of 1st MEF. They are assigned and allocated to the INDOPACOM with some traditional and historical ties to CENTCOM. The 2nd Marine Expeditionary Force and the Marine Forces Reserve are retained by the service. Every service out there holds back some combat power in order to offer it up in a contingency that isn't assigned to an O plan around the globe. So that's why II MEF and MFR are working together, because we are both service-retained forces, and it is our offering in times of contingency or crisis outside of INDOPACOM.
Next question. How is MARFORRES, or is MARFORRES, participating in force design?
You want to take a shot at that one?
Well, I think the commander just covered this huge part of what's happening with force design. But you know, we're in the 3rd year, right? The force design has been happening now for 2 years, and really the active component has been grinding and getting after what we need to look like in the future. So now this year, it's our turn. Not that we have figured out how we want to plan and what we want to look like in the future, and that's still developing, as the commander just stated. The service retained forces model and what we will look like in the future is a huge part of a Marine Forces Reserve and Marine Forces South will look like in the future. Yeah,
what's really interesting, I think, what the Marine Corps, service, the profile of service is changing. It used to be, certainly when we first started, was that if you joined the Marine Corps and were an active duty Marine, and you decided to leave active duty, the only way for you to continue service was as a reservist. But if you were a reserve Marine and wanted to go on active duty, that was really hard to do. But based on how we see the population emerging and developing in these different generations, we know that service itself is going to have to be much more permeable. By that I mean, if you're one of the best Marines in your MOS or in your specialty, and you decide that you want to continue service as a reservist based on your life, hey, we're happy to have you. We're happy to have you continue service. If, on the other hand, you're in the reserve component and you're ready to commit full-time to the Marine Corps and you want to go on active duty, what you'll see in the future is those swings back and forth between these components are going to be much more available. And of course, like always, the better Marine you are, the more options you have. Because the service understands that rule number 1 is we need to retain you. We need to keep you in the fight so that when the nation calls, we have the best possible Marines and the best possible leaders, and that's what ends up in victory on the battlefield. So that's what's changing now.
Sir, we just got a question asking about Reserve PME. Are there any changes coming down to align it, PME requirements to the reserve force?
Okay.
There is, in matters of PME, the most recent change that I'm sure you're aware of is the corporal's course. So corporal's course being now not just non-resident, but also resident. And we have until 30 September to get what this 8 drill corporal's course will look like. The POI is set, and we have sent it out, and the units will start performing it. You will start performing it wherever you are. And the feedback that we get from you, we're going to take that feedback, and we're also going to take a look at the sergeant's course and the career course and so on, and to see what the reserve component will look like in the future in matters of PME. Because PME is important. Obviously, we want the corporal, the sergeant, to be the best sergeant and corporal that they can be. Yes, but also advanced MOS school is just as important. So it doesn't have to be either or. It doesn't have to be both. But we do need data first. And I think once we get that this year, sir, I think we'll be able to move forward.
Yeah, Sergeant Major's been a real champion on this. He's been fighting this fight within the service. I mean, there's always a tension as a reservist regarding time, right? So it's great that all of these full-length active duty PME schools are open and available to Reserve Marines as well as active duty Marines, but not everybody can do that. So the question, there's always a tension, right? And it's been my own personal experience. Does Sergeant Ruiz, he's the best squad leader in the company, do I send him to PME this year, or does he go to ITX with us, or does he go on deployment with us? You know, if I'm thinking long-term for the health of the service, then I'd probably send Sergeant Ruiz to PME because I want him to be Sergeant Major Ruiz someday. And vice versa, you know, if he's advocating for, you know, Captain Bellon, what do I do this year? He's thinking long-term, but we have to balance, you know, the sets and reps. Every reservist, we you know, Sergeant Major, you know this just from watching and from your time as an I&I, but I know as a reservist, the repetitions we get on some place like an ITX or a deployment or Bridgeport or wherever we go are so important to our development. And the question is, what's more informative and critical for my future development? Is it experience? Is it PME? What's the blend of both? So those are the conversations. We're listening to you. We understand that's the tension you have. And the Sergeant Major is leading that fight back with the service to help make sure that the service understands that.
Just to give you a little more. So for enlisted PME, you know, it's for us, it's a journey. So, you know, it's a stepping stone. You're building your foundation, and as you move forward through the ranks, we're adding. So by the time you get to be a master sergeant or first sergeant or whatever route you choose to go, that PME has led to this incredible professional, the building of this professional along the way. For the officer corps, you know, you're led by law, and by law, you are required to do certain things as an officer at certain periods of time during your career. So how do we get, you know, how do we hurry while maintaining quality? How do we do it? How do we get that journey of the enlisted Marine in the reserve component with the limited time that we have?
General, just got this question. Good evening, gentlemen. How does MARFORRES plan to parallel the active duty forces modernization efforts regarding technologies, equipment, and policy implementation?
Yeah, this is a really common question we get, and sometimes it can boil down to, hey, are we going to get the same gear? And are we going to get the same mission sets? And so the answer is, if you think of it this way, if you are serving within a unit of employment, think squad, company, battalion, if you're ground combat arms, think det, squadron, if you're in the aviation community. If you're serving in a unit of employment, something that's going to deploy as a unit and go forward and fight as a unit, then you're going to look very similar. You're going to look very similar. You're going to have very similar capabilities, equipment, systems, weapon systems, and authorities that the active component would have, because our job is to show up and be interchangeable in war. All right. Now, there'll be some units that are really unique to the reserve component. Like the active component doesn't have civil affairs groups, for example. They don't have a personal recovery platoon. So there are some units that will continue to be unique and sourced from the reserve component, and it's a one-of. There'll be some units that only exist on active duty. You know, right now, critical skills operators in MARSOC right now only exist on active duty. Seaburf Marines only exist on active duty. If that model continues, then we will not look like them, obviously. But if you're like to like, if you're a squad leader in 23rd Marines, you're going to look very similar to a squad leader in 2nd Marines with your capabilities, authorities, and systems.
Sir, could you expand about what it said in the campaign plan about a potential relationship or a key relationship with MARSOC?
Yeah, so we've been partnering up with different commands within the Marine Corps over the past 2.5 years to discover what does the future look like, who are our good partners. So we talked a little bit about II MEF. The Commandant kind of pushed us together and has ordered us to discover this combined capability in response to contingencies. But a very early partner that emerged for us was MARSOC. MARSOC naturally sees the potential that these blended careers provide. If somebody that's got a unique skill set from your civilian career, but also has the fundamentally sound approach and capabilities as a Marine, that's really interesting to them because of the hybrid skill sets and the hybrid mission sets they have around the world. So they've been very interested in what we might be able to offer them, and vice versa, what they can offer us. And that's emerging. And we're talking about right now real world missions going to the field together, not training, actual missions and different combatant commands around the globe and testing some of these theories in the years to come.
MARSOC is also influencing us. So
Absolutely.
what I mean by that is MARSOC has that philosophy of human performance, right? And that is taking, Sergeant Major of the Marine Corps has taken that, and with our support, I think that's going to go far as a whole for the service.
Yeah.
Human performance, and exactly does that mean for us down the future? But for MFR and Marine Forces South, how do I take what MARSOC does, and what can I do with the resources that I have to put that same philosophy in all these different sites around the country? How do I establish those relationships with the community that's out there and empower you to do that? So I think MARSOC and us
Yeah,
will
they're
work well
definitely
together.
thought leaders, and also, they're asking good questions right now. If they go through the rigor to create a critical skills operator, one of their operators, for example, that is an exceptionally qualified Marine who you could say generally is at the very top end of their peer group across the Marine Corps. Well, just like every Marine who decides to leave active duty, they're looking for a place to affiliate where they can perform at the same high level of mission sets and bring all of their skills and capabilities to bear. Right now, there is no reserve structure that will allow that continued affiliation. So we're exploring all of these things with the same desired end state: enhance the total force and retain the total force.
General, Sergeant Major, with potential threats forcing us to prepare to fight in every climate and place again, will Marine Forces Reserve be given more opportunities to do ITX type training in locations other than 29 Palms?
Yeah, so believe it or not, there are only 3 ITXs. Every year there's 3. The active component gets 2, and the reserve component gets 1. So we have a third of the bandwidth for ITX, which, for those of you that have served in ITX, Integrated Training Exercise, it is the closest thing to combined arms actual warfare that I've ever experienced. I don't know if you've been, when you're talking about the real thing, that's about as close as we get. And the muscle movements required to execute that very complicated training evolution that lasts for weeks at a time, when you think about logistics and sustainment and all those battlefield functions that you can't just fairy dust on a short-term 2-day range evolution, all that capability is brought to bear. There's only one place in the Marine Corps across the globe where we as a service can do that, and that's at 29 Palms. Now, if you're a 14-year reservist and you're serving out there and name the CLB or infantry battalion, and you've been out to ITX 5 times, the idea of going back out to 29 Palms in August for your next ITX probably isn't really exciting if you're looking at it inwardly from a very personal perspective. As a leader, what I would challenge people to say is, hey, understand the context of what I just said. It's the closest thing in my experience that we get to actual fighting. And when you get mobilized in time of crisis, you go to something called the interim location, and that's what that looks like. So if you are advanced and you have multiple turns at ITX, what I would challenge you to do is think about, okay, your position now is really more of a coach. Yeah, you got to know your job, you got to perform your job, but you've got to shepherd those Marines through that first ITX so that we can get the most out of it. But to answer your question, we're not going to go to Argentina, drink wine, and have an ITX down there. That's not going to happen.
General, I think that's a good opportunity to expand upon our relationship with MARFORSOUTH South and what training opportunities that may provide the reserve in the coming years.
Yeah, so I think that's the biggest change that Reserve Marines have the biggest opportunity that they realized in 2021. The Commandant moved the MARFORSOUTH South headquarters to New Orleans and assigned Sergeant Major and I the authorities and responsibilities as dual-hatted command, meaning we're in command of Marine Forces Reserve, but also Marine Forces South. So I have some experience in SOUTHCOM from previous billets and jobs, and what I know is it's an excellent opportunity for us to deploy Marines. One of the ways the reserves got strong over the past 20 years is that we were pretty routinely deploying on real-world missions, particularly in Iraq and Afghanistan. And that, just like the active component, that really helped us professionalize the force and exercise the muscle, so to speak. So as Iraq and Afghanistan have stood down, we still need a sustained mission set against which to apply, identify, retain, and develop talent. And there are lots of opportunities to do that. What's also great about SOUTHCOM is that our primary adversaries are very active there. Our partners down there need our help, and it's in the same time zones generally as the United States. So we don't lose an additional day traveling on both ends, like we might lose if we're trying to do a summer AT in CENTCOM or in Indo-PACOM. That's my take. I don't know. What do you think?
The opportunities that are forthcoming I'm really excited for you, and I believe that it's going to do wonders to expanding how you look at the world. And what I mean by that is it may be, South America, but the values that we share over hundreds and hundreds of years, you'll find that, I'll give you an example. We were in Bogota, Colombia, not too long ago. And the conversations that I was having with the senior enlisted leaders of the Colombian Marine Corps and the Navy is very similar. There were very similar discussions, matters of retention and mental health, and how to become more lethal. And the expertise, for example, like a country of Colombia, that can give back to us as we move forward in the future training with them or any other partner will make you a much better warfighter. So I'm really looking forward to
Yeah, and from a tactical perspective, I mean, think of it this way. So Colombia is a country that's been at war for over 30 years. Even while we were visiting last week, there was a mortar attack and a bombing at one of their gates while we were down there. 30 years ago, the United States Marine Corps got deeply involved with the Colombian Marines. And we taught them things like riverine operations, small craft operations, patrolling, ambush, close reconnaissance. And they've been executing those things for 30 years. Well, now, we'll probably hear later in this conversation, the Marine Corps is really interested in recapturing our capabilities in small craft to be able to maneuver and sustain ourselves in the littorals, which includes across the beach, it includes in the rivers. Bottom line is we got to get back into the small boat business. And so the Colombians, we taught them that 30 years ago, and now they're some of the best in the world. When we go down there and visit them, they're some of the best in the world. Same with the Brazilians. And so now what's going to happen is we'll find that in the future you'll be serving and you'll have a chance to train with and deploy with Colombian Marines who will return the favor and help us get back some of those skills that have atrophied since we've been in the desert for 20 years.
The number one ask has been, how do I get you, the NCO and staff NCO, junior officer, over to Colombia to talk about leadership? And I find that just, it got me motivated.
Yeah, they're passionate about NCO development. Absolutely. They always ask the Sergeant Major, hey, do you have any Spanish-speaking Marines? One or two. Yeah, so it's a great opportunity for us.
General, somebody piped online asking for how you see the further development of the MARFORRES and MARFORSOUTH relationship. So since we already just covered about as we go down there and work with our partners in the jungles or in the cold mountains, what about the idea that it's also serving SOUTHCOM's real-world mission in competition?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're in the competition phase all the time. It's in the open. You've read it enough. Our primary competitors right now are China and Russia. Okay, but rule number one, when you're talking about competition, I don't care if it's tennis or warfare, you got to be on the field to compete. You can't compete via Facebook or PowerPoint. You got to be out there competing. That's our realm, physically on the ground. So we have a responsibility by law called Title 10, where we have to generate readiness and capability for the Marine Corps. And that means exercising the force, training the force. The question just a minute ago about ITX, that's part of that. We're training the force. But there is a way for us to work on enhanced skill sets and readiness, deploy or host our partners from Central South America and the Caribbean, and at the same time compete. So I'm quite confident if we had the right staff sergeant and we said, hey, here's your 18 Marines to go down into the summer, work with the Colombians. I need you to get down there, enhance your skill set, and also create a little friction for our opponents. Here's your left and right lateral limits, and this is my specific guidance to you. I'm not going to tell you how to do it, just get it done. You'd figure it out. And that's what the future is going to look like.
Can you expand, this is one from here in the building, can you expand upon the long-term vision for innovation within Marine Forces Reserve? In particular, how do you define success in this area? Is the Marine Innovation Unit the primary vehicle for innovation, or do you see a role for other kinds of units in this space?
So I'm going to have Sergeant Major start because he and General Pearson in his last billet with 4th MLG, I thought, were thought leaders in innovation and experimentation. Why don't you start, and I'll police the brass.
Well, we were absolutely the leaders in innovation. There's no doubt about that. But yes, so
I still owe you a NAM for that.
that's right. It's in the mail. But just to follow the commander here, there's a lot of pockets, not just in the reserve component, but in the active component. There was a period of time where we had a lot of pockets throughout the country that were doing great things. San Jose was 4th MLG and remains really the innovation hub for 4th MLG. And out of that little schoolhouse building surrounded by commercial buildings came out some great ideas and products that today will see the light of day in a few years. One example is the tea glass, if you remember the tea glass. But what's next? How do we get all these things and put them together in one place? And I think this is where MIU.
Yeah. So I mean, we talk about this when we're stuck at baggage claim at 2 a.m. or whatever. It's been our experience, and we have internalized this, that innovation, inspiration, insight, all of that is rank and billet agnostic. So we have to have a culture where I don't care if you're a lance corporal or a lieutenant colonel, if you see an opportunity for us as a service to gain an advantage and become better warfighters, we're wide open. So the proof of concept that the Sergeant Major talked about, that 4th MLG executed in San Jose, really was kind of a test, so to speak. So the question is, how do we scale that? How do we create a clearinghouse so that if you are that lance corporal or lieutenant colonel and you've got a real theory and theme and you want to be resourced, there should be a clearinghouse, standing structure that can receive those concepts and ideas and then in turn apply resources or to take on those concepts for experimentation at that one unit that is well resourced. And that's what the Marine Innovation Unit is. It's initially starting by combing the force. Some of you have probably already been approached for Marines with unique profiles. Maybe you're one of the best C++ coders on the planet, or you're a Wall Street analyst, or you're big on additive manufacturing, whatever it is that you do. Those are the kinds of people that are assembling now in order to engage, working hand in hand with the Marine Corps Warfighting Lab, which is the cutting edge of the services experimentation arm, and nesting with that. But it's really, think of it as a conduit or a clearinghouse for all those humans out there that have inspired ideas and concepts, and now it gives them a place to push them and maybe even serve there.
General, somebody was asking, are there any changes coming for the active reserve? Active duty Marines that work with the reserve on a daily basis and have a good understanding of the assets that they bring.
Yeah, so some of you may not know what the active reserve is. The active reserve are Marines who are assigned to the reserve component. They're actually reserve Marines, but they serve full-time. Other branches might refer to it as full-time support, but it is actual structure, meaning actual headcount of Marines. Their full-time job, they exist to facilitate the integration of the reserve component into operational necessities. And by that I mean, you might have Marines that are AR Marines, Active Reserve Marines, that work with 2nd Marine Expeditionary Force, and they're assigned there. Their job is to set the conditions within II MEF to receive reserve forces. And in between those times of crisis and contingency, to be that subject matter expert that can contextualize and provide a clear understanding to 2nd Marine Expeditionary Force about what capabilities exist in the reserves and how to access them. Some of the problems the service has had is that, we, and probably I'm looking at myself, senior Marines, have been kind of undisciplined about the use of active reserves. And they show up at someplace like II MEF, and that's a really talented major, and instead of having her do her primary job while she's there, she gets rolled into a different job because she's talented. So I think we're taking a really hard look at the active reserve program And we're willing to invest in it even more, but we've got to kind of clean our own kitchen first. We've got to be more disciplined as a force to make sure they're doing their primary job.
Do you think the reserves will have any sort of play with the MLR, the Marine Littoral Regiment?
Yeah, I don't know yet. For me personally, if you're just saying, and I'm not speaking on behalf of the service, all my caveats are established. So, the Marine Littoral Regiment is going to have to be a highly mobile, highly lethal, uniquely equipped and armed part of our force offering. And I don't know, maybe I'm trapped by my own experience. Maybe I'm a prisoner of my own experience. I don't know how we get into that mission set as reserve units of employment. I don't think we're going to create reserve MLRs. However, this mission set that's emerging with 2nd Marine Expeditionary Force, we are uniquely suited to. So if I had to forecast an outcome, and this is all pre-decisional, it would be that we're going to be closely aligned for global contingency response and not part of the enduring stand-in concept in the Pacific, which will be heavily invested in this Marine Littoral Regiment. That's my thought. What do you think?
The skill sets that we just talked about and how incredibly talented you are out there with your civilian job, and you may be C++ coder, but you are a motorman,
yeah,
right? Who knows? Down the line, there may be a need for your special skill set down the road. But right now, so as you said,
I think as individuals, absolutely. I have a hard time imagining a reserve force that is practicing on the weekends with naval strike missiles, for example. But I will say that you have consistently surprised me throughout my 4th decade here I'm in service. So who knows what happens, but that's what I think.
Does MFR augmentation to the active component in the future include regular mobilizations of units as a whole, or more likely to be individual scaled augmentations?
I think it'll be both. So the Navy Reserve is largely built around individual augments. That's their primary focus. I don't think we're ever going to get there. But I think if you are a uniquely trained and capable Marine, there will be lots of opportunities for you as an individual to go forward and serve across a menu of options. But the units of employment, I think what you're talking about, like the UDP program, the Unit Deployment Program that we've supported forever. So, for example, an infantry battalion goes out to Okinawa and takes its turn as part of the rotation that constantly comes and goes from the United States. I think those kinds of models will continue. Whether it continues in Okinawa or someplace else, that's to be determined. But I think that if you're serving in the reserve component, you could expect, especially if you're in a conventional unit of employment, no more than, I would say, once every 5 years would you be involuntarily mobilized, unless it's a crisis. But if you wanted to go more than that, there'll be opportunities for you to go more.
Can you give an update on what are the current and future Marine Forces Reserve restructure changes and timing of these changes in support of the Commandant's force design? For example, which major subordinate commands will see most change and by when? And is detailed planning at Headquarters Marine Corps being done to determine the makeup of the future reserve force? Or do we have a pretty good idea currently of what it would look like?
Yeah, Sergeant Major explained, there's a ton of work ongoing now. In fact, we're preparing to brief the Commandant on the outputs of a planning session that lasted for months, frankly, about what we think right now about where the future of the reserve structure should be, and if the service, if he decides yes, let's explore that more, there will be some changes. Nothing drastic yet because we still got to experiment and do the work. I think that the decisions that had to be made on a very short timeline, like tanks going away, that's already happened. The way I read the tea leaves now, it's going to be, hey, these are the new capabilities we need you to work with. Small craft, for example. Can you stand something like that up if we get that order? It won't happen overnight, but we'll probably identify units to say, hey, whichever, I'm not going to name companies, you think it's going to be your company, but X company or X detail, begin to explore the how would you restructure yourself if you became a small craft and go work with the small boat units from the SEALs for a little bit and get a handle on that. I don't know what it's going to look like, but I think in the next 2 years, you're going to start seeing more experimentation with existing force structure. I don't know, what do you think?
Not just that in matters of where you train and the things that you have and equipment that you need, and what you will look like, but I also link infrastructure to retention. So the things that we provide to you and what you need to do what you signed up to do, right? And if that's not being delivered to you, and you're disappointed in that, I think it's important for the service and important for us to figure out where to best provide you with the resources and the infrastructure to give you all the tools to be successful. And that's very important to me, because we owe you.
Yeah, we owe you that. If we're asking a lot of you, we got to prepare you and resource you properly.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Gentlemen, how do you see us better integrating the IRR to accomplish your campaign plan goals?
So I think the service right now is coming to grips with, and I hope there are active duty Marines listening in right now. We do a terrible job. We talk about this all the time. We do a terrible job as a service of articulating the value that we place on Reserve Marines. So, the IRR, for those of you that don't know, that's about 66,000 Marines that we're responsible for. The majority of them are coming off of active duty, say a 4x2 contract, 4 years of active duty and then 2 years in the IRR. And there's no real requirements of them in the IRR, and they kind of are sitting there and dwell for 2 years as they're moving forward to pursue their other goals. Well, I think that's widely understood by the service. That's kind of a quantitative analysis. But when you look at the quality of Marines that are in the IRR, it is astounding. And we need to make a more deliberate and disciplined approach to them to articulate how much we want them to serve with us in the reserve component, to lead Marines, to bring their unique skills to bear. Talk about a little bit about the meritorious sergeants. Explain that to the Marines.
So in the active component, a meritorious sergeant, as you would assume, is at the tier one Marine with options, right? And so the tier one Marine with options who came in and did what they wanted to do, and they exited the service. That meritorious sergeant is now sitting in the IRR. But the data point that I think is important to share is that there are more meritorious sergeants sitting in the IRR than they are currently in the divisions, in the services divisions, and the MAWs combined. So in your units today, could you not use 5 of those meritorious sergeants?
Yeah, and so we go around and we talk to these Marines. We talk to them at the mega musters. So here, a number that just shocked me. It takes 1,000 corporals to make one meritorious sergeant. So you're talking about Marines that have distinguished themselves 1 in 1,000. And they go into the IRR, and when we talk to them, very few of them have ever been spoken to about opportunities in the reserve component. They don't really understand what the opportunities are to drill, to continue to lead Marines, to be that 1 in 1,000. And no one's sat down and clearly articulated options, and also, candidly, how much we want them. Anybody that's tuned in tonight that's paying the penalty to actually listen to us would love to have a teammate of that caliber, right? So to answer your question, we're paying attention to the IRR, and we're going to need your help.
A meritorious sergeant, an 0331, who still wants to serve, and
lead
still
Marines.
wants to lead Marines, and you're close to an I&I where you currently work at, we can do something with that. We can do something with you. You don't have to be maybe an 0331.
Yeah, you have other goals, professional goals. You've already proven that you're so at the top end of your peer group. You have earned options, and we're listening. So,
I think I'd be remiss to ask the question: are any MARFORRES units going to Ukraine or Europe?
So, clearly right now the world's in a really dangerous place, and we're in an unclassified net, right? But if you were on alert, or if you were, if that happens to you, you will be told by your chain of command. And that's not going to be a big secret. I'm sure it'll end up in the anytime we do a mobilization, that is a very public thing. So you can infer from that there hasn't been any reserve units that have been mobilized so far. And so, however, hey, we are in a very dangerous business, and our job is to be prepared for the most dangerous course of action, regardless of what happens. Our job is not to hope for the best outcome. Our job is to be prepared. And clearly, there is a very dangerous set of circumstances happening in Europe right now, and our job is to be focused and be prepared.
All right, gentlemen, before closing comments on that, I think the last question is do you have any advice for the junior staff NCOs or the junior officers there on the front lines working with the Marines in regards to the campaign plan or just being ready as you just talked about?
Yeah, so I'm going to go first here. So first of all, if you don't know what it is, a campaign plan, just think of it this way. It's a roadmap. This is an organization of over 100,000 people. And so when you're trying to lead an organization like that, you kind of need a map about where you're trying to go. We're here, this is where we're going to go, and this is kind of the general route we're going to take. This will answer a lot of questions. It should be a pretty easy read, some awesome pictures. That Sergeant Lowe made the cover, Echo Company 223, squad leader. And there's some good information there. So I'd say if you're an officer, a staff NCO, or an NCO, absolutely get online and read that. And it'll probably give you more questions that we'd be happy to answer. It's funny. I'm at the age where I'm not a digital native. I didn't grow up with cell phones, the internet, email, or any of those things. So I really pay attention to how you're leading, not just the conventional ways that you're leading during drill or even in between drill, the kind of the ways that I grew up doing in the 90s and 2000s. I love the fact I got on my phone and I swept through some Instagram presences out there of Marines. There's a Constellation Group, I think it's First Sergeant Flynn, Lethal Minds Point Man, Master Gurney Polanco from this building's out there, Just Another Reservist, Reservist Coroner, Sergeant Major Don Reynolds is out there, Former Action Guys podcast is out there, The Communicator, we have a commo out there teaching basic comm classes online to help Marines understand it. I am really interested in how you are uniquely bringing your passion to bear in the information era and coaching and teaching Marines through your own voice, not through the formal mechanisms that I grew up with, but I love the fact that you're out there, participating and offer things like patrol base abate to the larger crowd. And I would encourage you to continue to participate and satisfy that irrational call to service that's within you. I'm not afraid of it. I'm not intimidated by it at all. I love the fact that you're leaning into that, and myself and my peers, we're encouraged by it. So find ways to make a difference. Find ways to exercise your unique leadership voice, and keep driving.
I would add, for the staff NCOs and the junior officers, there's so much talent in your formations today. And really allow for a place for these ideas to flow, and these ideas and ways and new ways of doing things to get up and be heard. But to the staff NCO particularly, who is very likely a non-obligor. I'm an active duty Marine, been in active duty my entire career, going 28 years plus. And there was a point in my career where it felt right. It felt perfect, and it was a great moment in my career where I was hooked, and I became what I call institutionalized, right? And so I would tell you, for you who continue to come, who are not obligated to do so, but you continue to serve, is to find a way to instill what someone did for you to those young Marines. And I think you're doing that, and I want you to continue to do that, and whatever I can do to empower you to do that, I'm all ears.
Sir, one more question slipped in. What is your message to the Reserve families during these turbulent times, and why should they continue to support their Marines?
Yeah, people ask me all the time, how do you stay in the reserves? How do you balance how do you balance life in the reserve component? Because if you're a really good Marine in the reserves, chances are you're really good at your job. Chances are you're a cornerstone of your family or community. And so as you go through life, get past your 20s, into your 30s, into your 40s, let's say, those problem sets become more and more complicated. And as I kind of reach near the end, I guess I'm closer to the end than I am to the beginning. I'm coming to grips with that. What I really believe is that the key to longevity and stability with those that love you and support you is to share the best aspects of ourselves as Marines. The leadership principles. Are you selfless? Are you listening? Do you demonstrate empathy, patience, and all those things that we expect of ourselves when we're leading and present with Marines? Are you holding those same standards with the people who love and support you, whether it's your family or your employer or whoever? And if the answer is yes, then what happens naturally and organically is you allow them a path to have the same pride in service. If they feel appreciated for the way they're enabling you, then they naturally will be supportive because they take pride in that. But if we have a certain degree of entitlement, or we don't act the same way with our family and our friends and our employers that we do with our Marines, we lower our own personal and professional standards, then there's naturally going to be fatigue and worry and anxiety and all those other things. I mean, our job is to be an example of that steadfast Marine that the public expects. And if we do that, then I think support and confidence follows. If we give off a wounded fish vibration or we act like a jerk, then naturally instability follows. That's just been my experience. I don't know, do you have any thoughts on that?
There's a part in the campaign plan that talks about being ready. And being ready is the whole concept of your family. And are they prepared? Have you prepared them? And I think the over-communication and not leaving stuff in the car and not passing the information on to the family, like we tend to do at times, I think tends to leave a lot of blind spots there. So I would ask you out there to over-communicate. And this is what's happening. This is the schedule, and this is where I'll be. And I know that the families could not be prouder of you today, whether you're an obligor or not. You're a United States Marine, and the American people sure respect that.
Share your confidence, share your story with the people that are close to you and with the public.
All right, gentlemen. Final thoughts? If those weren't it, and we can call it a night.
Just train him hard.
Yeah. Hey, look, we're so proud of you. You know, we love to come and visit you, and we love to spend time with you and your Marines. You can't ask something of us. If you say, hey, do you have 10 minutes? Of course we have 10. We have as much time for you as you can imagine. And this is a natural extension of that. Yeah, it's kind of awkward. You know, how do you have a virtual town hall and you sit here in the dark room at 1900 and you try to communicate via a laptop? Well, we're making an effort. And if you've got ideas, and I guarantee you all these folks, the Constellation Group for Sergeant Flynn, Sergeant Major Reynolds, all the rest of you, you're way better at this than we are. But we have the same desired end state. We're trying to connect with and inspire and inform the force. So if you've got ideas about how we can do this better, man, we're all ears. We're ready to row. Have a great night. Semper Fi.
Semper Fi.